Good afternoon and welcome to Sober Thursdays. As many of you may be aware, right now is Alcohol Awareness Month. And throughout this month, we are going to be bringing you live chats with AAC experts that are on the front lines of helping people who are struggling right now with alcohol. But the question we're talking about today is, do I have a drinking problem? It's a question a lot of people ask themselves, and a question we're going to be talking about today on Sober Thursdays. Now, we also want to let you know that if you have any questions, our panelists are prepared to answer questions. So we'll be looking for any thoughts that you may have. Feel free to drop that in the chat, but let's get Sober Thursdays started. Hello, and welcome to Sober Thursdays, our AAC chat. And I'm joined with me is our illustrious panel. And what makes this panel so special, everyone, is not only are these individuals, and I'll call them out by name, on the front lines dealing with people or helping people who are struggling right now, but they're all in recovery. So when you think about it, we're having a candid conversation about the real deal about alcohol, when people are struggling, what they should do. Is it dependence or addiction? We're talking about it all. So I'm going to introduce my panel today. We have Bryce. Bryce is in our admissions center. He's there helping people. When people call in to help, call in for help, they're connected to Bryce or have an opportunity to connect with him. We also have Nikki. She is our boots on the ground. Nikki is actually boots on the ground in Ohio, helping people to access treatment. We have Philip. He's based at our greenhouse location, and he also is out there in the community doing great things and making sure that people have access to the support and care they need. And finally, we have Carla. She's also an admissions navigator who's been helping people, especially during the pandemic, during this difficult time, to get help and their loved ones. So thank you all panelists for joining us for this talk today.
Thanks for having us, Joy.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
So one of the first questions I want to start with, and I'm going to start with you, Carla, because you're hearing people calling in right now, and we've been in the midst of a pandemic. There's been so many things going on right now. Do you find more people are struggling? What are you seeing just as people are calling in for help?
Absolutely. Especially once the pandemic really kicked off. People who had been sober were relapsing, they're quarantined, they're by themselves, depression and anxiety are, at an all-time high. People who never had a problem suddenly did because they are home all the time. They think, oh, well, end of my workday at 3 p.m., I'll just have a drink. And then people who kind of had a problem ramped up to full-blown abuse and addiction. So yeah, we're busier, more than ever, which is heartbreaking, but at the same time, I'm so happy people are getting help. So yeah, I've seen it a lot, and it's sad, but I'm glad we're here.
Yeah. And the thing that I think is so interesting about what you said, Carla, is many people don't realize, we're in the midst of this opioid crisis, and we hear about the opioid crisis, but actually more people go to treatment for alcohol than any other drug. Mm-hmm. Nikki, what are you seeing out there in the community? I know you're on the front lines in Ohio.
Mm-hmm. I'm seeing the same thing, and Carla spoke very well about it. There are people in recovery that have had 20, 30 years, and they've relapsed on alcohol, and they, need treatment and need to know where to turn. And I am glad we're here too, Carla. Thank you. Even with, like you said, Joy, even with opioid addiction and other drugs, alcohol seems to be involved. Somehow, some way, alcohol is usually always involved. And a lot of the time it'll start that way, maybe in adolescence or teenage years, college years, as just, experimental drinking or whatever, and just can progress into other substances. But alcohol is usually always there. Yeah, that's my experience.
I mean, that's really interesting to think about, because you're saying, one, we know that it's the number one reason why people come to treatment. Two, even when there are other substances involved, that alcohol always seems to be one of the drugs that's in the mix. So here's the question I'm going to throw out to Philip, and then we're going to come to you, Bryce. Philip, my question for you and I know you're in recovery, and I know alcohol was one of the things that you struggled with yourself. Do you think that most people, when it comes to alcohol or realizing what's going on, do you think most people even realize early on that they have a problem?
I don't know what most people feel. I know that it's easy to slip up with alcohol. It's one of those things. It's legal. I mean, that kept me out a long time. It raised a fence for me with other people that use drugs. I said, well, I'm not like them. If I were like them, maybe I'd get help, because after all, what I'm doing is not illegal. And so that added a dimension to it that kept me out longer than it needed to be. And I want to go back to something Nikki said. Actually, Carla started it, Nikki said it, and I want to just compliment both of them. One of the things that I see is I see a lot of people that come in on alcohol that have never used drugs, but I've never seen someone come in on drugs that hasn't also included alcohol. And the reality is since I've been in recovery, I've come to understand it doesn't matter what the chemical is, they're all drugs. The fact that we call this Alcohol Awareness Month, great. That just happens to be the main substance that I use that took me to places I didn't want to ever go.
Right. And you know what I hear, Bryce, you said yes to that. What resonated with you with what Philip said? What stood out to you as someone in recovery? And Philip is saying, oh my goodness, it took me to places I never thought I would do, and it was legal.
Mm-hmm. Just the simple fact that I was just doing it on a daily basis, for example. It was to the point couldn't keep me behind the wheel of my car. I was going to do it. I wasn't going to get in trouble because it's legal, but because it became so much of an issue. And I realized it. I didn't care at the time. Trouble. But it just resonated. It just resonated because it's just true. It was my experience. It was my experience.
Well, you talk about experience, and I think something you said was really powerful. And I don't know if anybody wants to jump in here, but what you said, Bryce, that really hit me is that I kind of started to know I had a problem, but I didn't care. Do you find that a lot of people, and I don't know who wants to jump in, I see both Nikki and Carla going, I have something to say, but do you find most people are at a point sometimes where they don't care or they want to ignore the fact that they have a problem?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a big point of the question of, do I have a problem, right? And when do I know? And there's little ways we think about alcohol in our brain, right? It's thinking about, well, why does someone not finish their beer? Like, oh, you left half a beer, why? People who don't struggle with alcohol are fine to leave that beer. It was making me, like Philip said, do things I would never dream of doing when I was sober. And there was a point in my life where I'm like, yeah, maybe I could cut down, maybe that wasn't so great that night, but I did it anyway, knowing full well the consequences. And that weird, confusing dichotomy of, this is a problem, but I keep doing it anyway. And that to me is like the epitome of addiction, is logically, but there is no logic to addiction. And especially with alcohol, when we can justify it, it's legal, it's socially not just accepted, but encouraged, right? Like we see on movies and TV all the time, like people going out and getting drunk. There's an entire movie called The Hangover. Like this is just expected. Sorry about my cat. So it's an encouraged thing, and it's cheap too, and it's legal. People say, well, at least I'm not doing that. I'm not using heroin, and there's like this big stigma around that. Whereas drinking, there's much less stigma. And it's like the only reason there is that stigma there, especially with things that are illegal, is because it's illegal. People have to do extra things that are really awful to get that substance.
Mm-hmm. So, and I want to piggyback on something you said, because everybody, I think both you, Bryce, and Philip said, hey, I realized it. Maybe I didn't care. Maybe I started to. And there's people who are probably watching going, okay, that's me. But what was it? What do you find was your wake up call? Was there something that happened And Nikki, I see you're going back in your mind. Nikki, was there a moment that you said, oh my goodness, this is out of control? Something is beyond, this is more than just drinking a lot. There's something I need to do about this. What was that moment for you?
My moment was it's on that same realm of not caring. Like logically I knew it was a problem, but I just wanted to escape from my stressors, from my responsibilities. It felt good to relax and not have to worry, because when I was under the influence, I was much more relaxed and didn't care. But I was looking at I have 3 boys, and I was looking at them and I couldn't feel them. I knew how much I had loved them, and I was sitting there watching them watch TV, and usually I'd be all like, "Oh, my babies," you know. I didn't care. I could not feel, I could not tap in to the love, like I was losing me. It devastates me to think about. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, this is much more than just an escape. I was dying not only, physically, but now emotionally, spiritually, but even with that, I didn't stop then either. I didn't, because that was a reason to drink. That was another reason to drink.
And I also wanted a snowball effect kind of for you. Okay. And when I think about that, I think, Nikki, first of all, being transparent, that's a transparent moment as a mother to say, I was a mom. I know I love my boys. I'm looking at my boys and I don't feel anything. And realizing that something is off. And I think, first of all, thank you for that transparency, because that's going to set somebody free today who's probably seeing that. And like you said, made them want to drink more because they're like, what's wrong with me? So Bryce, what was your moment? I know you said there were times you didn't care, but was there a moment that it started to click for you that I got to do something?
DUI number 1 and DUI number 2. I caught DUI number 1 August 26, 2015, and I caught DUI number 2 my 25th birthday on the 20th of September. Not even realizing that when I caught the first one, they were going to send, because I've gotten in trouble, they sent correspondence from the courts that I was to make sure that I was to be in court, or ABCD. So my mom, my mailing address was my grandmother's. My mother got a hold to it and called and asked me, have you gotten in trouble? Mom, I'm at work. I can't talk about this. No. Have you gotten in trouble? Yeah, Mom, I'll talk to you later. So it was at that moment, and I was just like, and this was DUI number 1. So DUI number 2, couldn't tell you what happened. I went out for my 25th birthday, enjoyed myself, was cool until I got in my car and I remember nothing. I remember a cop knocking on my window. And I just said, wow. I had to spend 3 days in jail. Mind you, my birthday, the whole remainder of my birthday. Mom got me out. My aunt came and picked me up and told me that you're not going back to where you were. You're coming home, basically, because you need to get yourself together. So that was aha moment number 1. I caught DUI number 3 2 years later because I relapsed 10 months after that. So the biggest aha moment, and when I said, I can't do this, I wrecked my car and almost killed myself. And I say that because that's just my testimony. That's what I had to experience. God's been showing me all these years, running up curbs, catching flats, dozing off at the wheel, about to hit a car on my left or my right, about to run in the back of somebody, that's what it took.
You almost lost your life. That final 3rd DUI, it was so bad you almost lost your life. And that was kind of so jarring to you, even though you'd had these subsequent, that it was like, wow. I think that's real. I mean, that's powerful, because some people have to have that rock bottom moment, but then there are other people, hopefully they can hear what you're saying and say, hey, I got that first DUI. This is a wake up call. It's not going to get better if I don't do anything about it. So Philip, let's go to you. What was your wake up call moment?
I think when someone said, you know what, I was an executive, you can't be employed here, you're drunk. And I said, you can't afford to fire me. And they said, actually, you're right, but we're going to do it anyway. And so it was the cost of my behavior exceeded a price that I was willing to pay. And I can still remember that day. We didn't have the ability to communicate the way we're communicating now. And they had me go to a special shop where they had the television cameras. Because of my position, they had to do an interview with me via satellite hookup so that they could explain to me that I was being terminated, and they could capture all that on film. And when it was all over with, I remember saying to my wife, I said, I've got to go to a meeting. She assumed it was a business meeting. And when I didn't know how to spell Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know how to spell anonymous. What I did was I Googled it, and I found out there was a meeting in the town next to mine, and I ended up going to my first meeting. And I wasn't convinced, but I went to a meeting. I didn't know what else to do.
Wow. So it was that job situation. I mean, we've had everybody kind of share experience. And before we kind of start pulling up, I want to go through some telltale signs, because that's what we want people to walk away with. Before we do that, Carla, hearing everybody first, we had Nikki. It was realizing she wasn't feeling anything. Bryce, he almost died in a car accident. We have Philip, who ends up losing a job, even though they said he was a valuable employee. He's losing his job. So Carla, what was that wake-up call for you?
Yeah, so the incredible thing about addiction, like clearly all of our stories are very different. Every journey is different. I think it's important to take a moment and know that we shouldn't compare our journey to someone else's. My moment started in 2018. I had worked on this amazing creative project with a friend, and it was a podcast. And during the first episode, I was drinking and I blacked out and I didn't remember any of it. And I was so disappointed in myself that I was like, I need to stop, because this is something I worked really hard on that I'm really passionate about. I don't even remember it. It took me about a year after that to get sober. I lost my job. I wrecked my car. I was incredibly depressed to the point of suicidal ideations. And that even didn't get me to that point. It was one day when I was tired of disappointing a loved one, because every time we talked, I wouldn't remember. I was a blackout drunk. I would forget our whole conversation, be freaked out that the next day, what did I say? And it was never bad, but it was enough to be embarrassed and ashamed and tired of disappointing that person that I said, that's it. That's what it's going to take. I have to stop this, because it is ruining the most important thing in my life, which is my relationships with loved ones.
No, I think that's so powerful. And I think that, it just shows, like you said, Carla, everybody's journey is different. But let's start. I want to dive into 4 areas. If you're watching this on replay or you're watching this live with us, we're going to go through some subsections of what might be some signs to you. So we're looking up here at physical changes. Your tolerance level has increased. Maybe you're having alcohol cravings, withdrawal symptoms, feeling hungover while not drinking, experiencing temporary blackouts or short-term memory loss, or drinking first thing in the morning. By a show of hands, how many of you experienced one or more of these symptoms early on before you even realized you had a problem? Okay. How many of you experienced at least 3 or more of these? Wow. Okay. So early on, these were some of the things that you were experiencing, which is really interesting. Does anybody have anything they wanted to share about the physical changes? Because we're going to go through physical changes, behavior changes, relationship issues, and control. Anybody have a story or any insight they want to share off of one of these things mentioned through physical changes that was a really good telltale sign for them before you got to the point of wrecking the car or saying I need to go and get help, but that was like a first sign for you?
Yeah, can I share real quick?
Yes, go ahead, Philip.
I was going to do a show in New Orleans. My wife had never been to New Orleans. I hadn't had a drink in a year. It started on kind of like someone saying to me, do you ever think you drink too much? And it offended me so badly that somebody even mentioned that to me, that for the next year I didn't drink. Did this show in New Orleans, and my wife had never been there. And I said, hey, why don't you go with me? So I took her with me. We spent a couple of days. She didn't know that I hadn't had a drink in a year. She didn't pay attention to it. She's not a drinker. And the day before we were due to leave, I ordered a glass of wine. We were at the Marriott on the Riverwalk there, and we were at the top having a glass of wine. And I said, we're going to go to dinner. Let's just split a quick glass of wine. We had a quick glass of wine, and we went to dinner. The next morning, we're opening the show. She left to go back to Dallas. We did the show that night. I went to the captain's table. I haven't had a drink in a year. I've had one glass of wine the night before. And the first thing I do is I open with 4 scotches, 2 bottles of wine. I go back to the hotel for like 4 nightcaps. The progressive nature of the disease. When I got into recovery, I found out that was one of the examples. And it was so real to me. That's really what happened. Even though I'd stopped drinking for a year, my disease had continued to progress as if I hadn't stopped drinking. And I vividly remember that.
Wow. I think that's really a good point to bring up, Philip, that, it was a year. So you thought, oh, no big deal. I have control over this, right? That one alcohol, that one glass of wine leads you to go the next night to a bar. And, like you said, you drank a lot and then went home and had a nightcap. And I think that's really powerful for people to remember, even as we're talking through this and you're recognizing maybe you or a loved one has any of these symptoms, that this isn't something that goes away. Addiction is something that is lifelong that you have to deal with. And so really paying attention to these changes. Let's move on to the next one, where we're going to be looking at behavior changes. Exhibiting signs of irritability and extreme mood swings, dropping the ball on life, making excuses for drinking, such as, I have to relax. Nikki said that. I need to relax. I'm dealing with stress. This is normal. Drinking alone or in secrecy. Now, Bryce, is any of these really touch you when you think about your experience of one of those that was a telltale sign, if you're looking back over your life, of how this kind of began for you?
All 4 of them.
All 4. Okay.
I was very irritable. By nature, I'm a little moody anyway. It was worse. I was very unstable, just to touch on dropping the ball on life. Very unstable. Couldn't figure it out at all. It was always, I'm tired. I had a long day. I'm stressed. Let me drink. First thing I did when I got off to work, go to the gas station, give me a 40. And before I knew it, I was drinking. I literally, and just thinking, but in hindsight, I was drinking gallons of beer on a weekly basis. And I really didn't realize that literally until this year. I was actually talking to someone and I said, wow, I didn't even realize how much I was drinking. Minimum, it would be a 40, and it got to where a 40 ounce of beer, and it would get to where that didn't work. So I'd either go back to the gas station, a little buzz, and grab another 24 ounce or another 40 ounce beer. And I would do this sitting in the living room floor, Indian style. That's another reason I knew I had a problem. I would sit Indian style, put on some music in the middle of the living room floor, just
drinking,
doing what I did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's deep. I mean, I think what you said was very powerful, because you said, I had all of these. So if somebody's watching right now, your loved one, you're thinking, okay, signs of irritability, I'm dropping the ball in life. Like you were, but the interesting thing is, Bryce, you were managing a job. You had a job. Even at one point, Philip said he was doing his job. Carla, she's helping a friend with the podcast, and she had a job. Nikki, everybody was working, and yet these things are happening. I think this is very powerful in terms of what we're sharing. Let's move on to relationships, because, Carla, you touched on this. A big deal can be a red flag in looking at relationships. Friction in relationships, becoming isolated and distant from friends and family members, changing group of acquaintances, because of course people start to realize you have a problem. So Carla, when you're looking at this list from a relationship standpoint, what hits you the most in terms of these 3 bullet points?
Yeah. So I think the becoming isolated and distant from friends and family members is a big one. I actually live about 1,000 miles away from my family there in Denver, and I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee. And so my immediate family didn't really see what was going on with me. They knew that maybe I thought I drank too much. They didn't know that I was a true alcoholic and addict until 6 months after I was sober, because there was a lot of shame and embarrassment around that. But I think that goes hand in hand with the drinking alone. And, wanting to drink alone so people don't know how much you're drinking, I found a bottle of wine an empty bottle of wine in my closet a year later after I quit drinking. I'm like, wow, I had that really well, even from myself. And you stop going out with people that don't drink that much anymore because you want to drink and you want to be able to hide your drinking in those social settings. So you do weird things like buy a round of shots. Like you're like, okay, everybody's had two. I want to drink more. I'll buy everybody shots so it doesn't look like I'm drinking so much alone. Or you start to leave places early, functions and events early, because you're thinking, okay, I can't get drunk here, or I can't drink as much as I want to here, but on my way home, and my thing was wine, and I could drink 2 to 3 bottles of wine in a night. I wasn't a day drinker, but honestly, that doesn't matter. Whether you're drinking all day or have, a pint of whatever at night or a couple of bottles of wine, doesn't matter. But that would be my big thing is, okay, well, on my way home, I'm going to go pick up a bottle of wine or a 6-pack of beer, and then I can drink as much as I want alone in my room. Because I had roommates, so I was drinking in my room so that they wouldn't see what was going on. So yeah, I think that goes hand in hand, that isolation and your thoughts and planning around alcohol. I used to plan my weekends around my hangovers, not even my drinking, my hangovers. People who don't struggle with addiction don't do that. It's just not a logical thought process. Like instead of, I gotta, not schedule anything in the morning because of my hangover, people think, well, I'm just not going to drink tonight. That's what normal quote unquote people do.
Mm-hmm. I think that you gave a lot of golden nuggets there. The secrecy for you to go back 6 months after you're sober and realize that you had a bottle of alcohol inside your closet. Like you were hiding this not only from your family, but even from the roommates that you were, who were living with you, so they couldn't see the extent of the problem. And I think that's a telltale sign, as we're saying, hey, if you're listening to this and you realize that you're the person who's sitting Indian style in the middle of the living room, like Bryce was talking about, and you're drinking a 40 and then it's not enough, or you're saying, oh, I have to leave the party early and go get my own drink so nobody thinks that I have a problem. Guess what? This is a sign for you. Let's move on to the final. We've talked about physical, behavioral, relationship, but control issues. Here's another big one. And Nikki, I want you to kind of address this one. Control issues. You're drinking more than you intend. You've gotten into legal trouble. Bryce talked about the DUIs. You want to stop, but you can't. Break this down for me in terms of your experience and why the control is a telltale sign for people that, hey, something's not right.
So this is going to sound a little different. Everybody's journey is different, but I think deep down inside our feelings are the same eventually. And that's why we come into recovery. Drink more than intended. I intended to drink as much as I could because I wanted to get drunk. So I didn't have that problem. I wanted to drink as much as I could. Gotten into legal trouble. I did not get into any legal trouble. Like there was a slide earlier, I kept a job. I wasn't dropping the ball on life until I realized that I was. Everything in my life that was being maintained was not being maintained by me. But I had my house, I had my job, I had my car, my boys were fed, but I had family paying bills. I had family, taking the kids. I had, so it took a while for me to realize that I did have a problem because of these things. The biggest thing that resonates with me is you want to stop, but you can't. I actually worked in the field before I entered into recovery. And at one point I would say, I'm not going to drink today. And every single time I said that, I ended up drinking. And it had to be a year later when I realized, oh my gosh, I've said this for a year and I can't stop. I didn't know I couldn't stop until I couldn't stop. It's crazy.
Well, first of all, there were so many things I want to break down in what you said, Nikki. One, that sometimes you don't have all the problems. You were holding it together. So a lot of times you have people, we hear that term functioning alcoholic, right? There are some people who are going and is it really functioning? I see Carla shaking her head, but people who think they're holding it together, like, well, I'm not that, I can't be having major issues. Guess what? I'm doing all these other things. I am available. I'm holding a job. I'm there. I have a house, but that can be an issue. So I think that's really powerful. So as we transition this conversation, thank you for having, for going through those symptoms. I want to talk about, just in general, we're going to go back to all of us talking about, here's the thing I think people struggle with. People say, yeah, I can drink sometimes, but I can stop it. Philip went a year. Yeah, I don't have to do it all the time. And maybe sometimes I'm out of control. They're kind of in this denial. So how do I know, in your opinion, that it's just a dependence issue? I'm just dependent on it, versus maybe this is really an addiction. And I think that's a murky, kind of confusing thing for a lot of people. Carla, let me go to you because I see you have an answer. I can just feel it.
Yeah, I talked with someone earlier today who's a drug and alcohol counselor. I'm like, let's talk about this. Where is that line? Because it is really murky, and honestly, it kind of depends on which model you work off of, whether it's the AA model or the disease model. But the way I break it down very simply is, alcohol addiction is one, it's ruining your life. Two, you can't stop on your own. You're getting those withdrawal symptoms. And that to me is the addiction part. Abuse is maybe you're drinking more than you should on a given weekend, maybe binge drinking. But if they feel those consequences and they stop, then that's, not full-blown addiction. They recognize it and they do something to take care of it, or they just don't do it anymore, but the addict can't. They see the problems, but they do it anyway, like we had spoken about earlier. So it is a murky line, but I say, if you feel like you have a problem, just talk to someone about it, because then they can clarify for you. Yes, maybe this is the path you should take, or maybe this is the path you should take, whether it's therapy or rehab or medication. I mean, there's so many different paths to sobriety, but since it is so murky, it really is taking that hard look at ourselves that I think is really scary for a lot of us, because we're scared that what we're going to find underneath is it's not going to be someone we like. And it always is. We always generally like ourselves. We're like, okay, I'm not so bad. I'm a good person. Maybe I've done some bad things. But taking that hard look at ourselves is the hardest part to me of getting sober. When we all said there was that moment where it clicked, because then we had to realize, one, I have this problem. Two, there's a big stigma associated with it. Still, unfortunately, it's getting better, especially through the pandemic. That's been one kind of silver lining around the whole thing, is that mental health and addiction has really come to the forefront, and that there's less stigma about it. But yeah, taking that hard look at ourselves is the hardest part of realizing we have a problem. And so if we can do that, then we can really piece out what is actually going on here. Am I abusing alcohol, or is it truly an addiction that really needs some immediate emergency attention?
No, I think that's so good. So all of those list of things that we went through, if you're watching today and you identify with some of those things that we mentioned, it's a time to take a look. It's time to say, maybe I need to talk to somebody. It's time to say, let me see what's really going on here. Because the truth of it, and many people don't realize this, that if it is full-blown addiction, or you're just starting with abuse and it leads into an addiction, if left untreated, it gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bryce said that. Bryce said, okay, I started 1 DUI, 2 DUIs, 3 DUIs. Then I'm almost, So what would you say, Nikki, to someone when we're thinking about, well, this will just go away? And I think you'd be a good person to talk about this, because you were at a point you're like, oh, well, I think I can stop. I can stop if I want to. This will just go away. It's no big deal. So what do you say to people who have that thought?
So the disease of addiction is a thinking disorder, and your disease wants you dead. So if you're having those thoughts, chances are you're in a place, like Carla said, where it's time to tell somebody. And I think it's important to let people know. For me, I was very much embarrassed and ashamed, because if I have this, then that means I must be full of BS with all these other people that I'm trying to help, number one. And number two, what kind of a person does that make me? I'm somehow not a good person. That is the farthest thing from the truth. This disease does not discriminate. Some of the best people, everybody I know that's in recovery, or even some in active addiction right now, are the best people ever. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean, you're not smart, or whatever your brain tries to tell you. So chances are, if you're having these thoughts already, talk to somebody, and please just, it will only get worse. It's not going to go away. And like I said, for me, there in the beginning, there were days where when I could stop. But then when I started telling myself I'm not going to today, that's when it really, like in hindsight, that's when I knew, but I didn't do anything about it. Would it not have led to addiction? I don't know. I'm not sure. But I'm also not worried about it because I found the solution today and I'm in recovery and I'm happier than I've ever been. And I work a 12-step program, but there are many different paths. And I used to hear people say, I'm so glad I'm an alcoholic. And I'm like, are you nuts? But now I get what they mean because there's a solution. You don't have to live like this. So if your brain's telling you these things or you're thinking about these things, you should probably just reach out right now. Just right now.
That's good. And we do have a number on the bottom of the screen. So if somebody is sitting there listening to this and going, oh my goodness, this is me or a loved one, you can call that number 866-244-1070. It will connect you to someone in our admission center. They can walk you through this and all of that. And so they can help you kind of figure out where you are and do you need help? So if that's you, you can also go to AmericanAddictionCenters.org. We have a ton of information on our website that can be powerful and insightful. And so one of the things I wanted to end on is we've had this very impactful conversation is, what if I'm not the person, but I'm the loved one? So I want to start with two people on that. So Bryce, I remember you said you got this call, you're at work and your mom is going, what's going on? Are you in trouble? Then your aunt shows up and said, you're not going back to your house. You're coming with us. So what do you do? What are your thoughts around from your own experience about the loved one? I'm a loved one. I'm listening today and I'm going, oh my God, this is my child. This is my father. This is my mother. What would you say?
I would say talk to him. Me and my mother are like this with thick as thieves. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a mama's boy to the core. That was just one thing that I just did not feel comfortable talking to my mother about because her and my dad, and that's one thing me and my dad have in common. My dad struggled for years. That's where our relationship, we became super tight, super thick tight. I was able to talk to him once things had transpired. I never really said much to him until things started transpiring. But I'm going to say for sure, talk to somebody, especially if there are signs that if you feel as though people are catching on you, because I kind of felt as though that, even friends never once really said anything, but roommates that I've had before, they're like, you drinking again? Man, yeah, shoot, why not? Talk to somebody. I never did. And it got me where I was. So
no, I think that's powerful because here you and your mom are close, but you didn't share this part of you. And I think that we have to, as loved ones, have the courage to say something, right? Because you can die. You could have been killed in that car accident. Anything can happen. I mean, the effects of alcohol on your body over time, anything happens. So Philip, how would you say that the loved one, what do I say? Do I just ask them? What is your thought?
Yeah, I've got some experience with this. I mean, having some kids that have gone through, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And it's one of those things, if you're a loved one will recognize it for what it is before the addict alcoholic will recognize it for what it is. And they'll see the abnormal behavior. And if you're a loved one, the worst thing you can do is allow this disease to take both of you hostage, because it's already taken one person hostage. If you don't say something, it's taken a second person hostage or the rest of your family hostage. It's always the elephant in the room, and it's not going away. I think Carla said it, Nikki said it. It's not going away. And so what you've got to do is even if the person that you love won't get help, reach out, get a therapist, because the therapist is going to help you how to figure out what your boundaries are. The other person, all that can happen is if you don't treat that disease, there's a monkey on the back. The monkey's got to be fed. and it's going to be fed no matter what. And so something's got to happen. And the best thing a loved one can do is sit down, find that moment when you can have a talk and start applying some boundaries. But you can love someone to death.
Literally.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
The boundaries have to come out. And that's the only way people will, that's the only way it's going to change is if the loved ones, if they take a stand. And it's because they love you. Unconditional love means they're going to take a stand and help you get the help that you need.
Yeah.
I love that. We just, as we wrap up this conversation, we've been talking about the signs that you could have a drinking problem, why you don't want to ignore it, because it can get worse. It can be progressive. It is progressive. So let me not say can be. It is progressive. And two, we've had our whole panel here just being very transparent. They're on the front lines every day, helping people to get the help that they need. So I want to give each of you about 15 seconds for any final thoughts. If there's one message you could leave today, if there's one final nugget that you'd want to say as we wrap up this episode of Sober Thursdays, I want to hear it from you. And I'm going to start with Bryce in the way that I see you. So Bryce, what would be your final thing that you'd want to make sure that somebody got from our conversation, our chat today?
I'm going to definitely say if you feel as though you've got a problem, if you got to question it, you probably need to go ahead and check into that. Move forward in that process.
That's good. Move forward. If you're questioning, that's a good one. If you're even questioning, that's a sign in and of itself. Okay, Nikki, final thought from you.
It's really going to be the same thing that Bryce said. If you're having questions, if you're having thoughts, and don't be so ashamed and so embarrassed. This is a safe space. That's what we're here to do, is to create a safe space to help you navigate. There's going to be no pressure. There's going to be no judgment. But we're here not only to help save your life, but give you back the quality of life that you deserve to live. So just reach out. A conversation can't hurt.
Yeah, that's good. A conversation. Ooh, that's good. A conversation can't hurt. Philip, final thoughts from you.
I think everybody's summed it up already. We're not bad people trying to be good people. We're sick people, and we deserve to be well. Talk to anyone. Just talk to anyone. And if it's like Carla was talking about with the roommates, talk to your roommates. If they love you, they're going to be honest with you. But you got to talk to somebody. The mind that got you here is not the mind that's going to get you out of here. And for most of us, we don't have a drinking problem. We have a thinking problem. That's our issue.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. So final, Carla, we're going to let you round it out in our first episode of Sober Thursdays as part of Alcohol Awareness Month, and your final thoughts to round out this conversation.
Absolutely. So you guys see the number at the bottom of the screen. If you call it, you'll reach someone like me. You can always ask for me too, because I help a lot of families. I want to end on the family thing and friends about talking to someone, because it's a hard conversation to have. People get defensive. They get angry. Just know that's okay. There will be tears and crying and screaming and yelling and slamming of doors. That's okay, because you're saving their life. The tough love is okay. So with family members, I want you to ask one question, because we talk about the rock bottom for the addict, right? That happens for the loved ones too. When are you going to hit your rock bottom with this? Addiction, like Philip said, it's a vortex. It sucks everyone in, and sometimes affects the loved ones more than the addict themselves, a lot of times. So have that conversation. Be prepared that it may not go the way you want, but usually at the end of the day, it really does, because it shows that you love them and that you care. And that's all we really want. We want validation and love.
Validation and love. And I couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Bryce, Nikki, Philip, and Carla, for your transparency and your own stories, and for helping us to have this very important chat. And that's going to do it for Sober Thursdays. Join us back here next Thursday. We're going to be talking about detox, denial, and the dangers. So all month long, our Sober Thursdays AAC chat, we're going to get you the answers that you need. And thank you again for joining us, and make sure that you reach out to somebody if you need help.
All right.